This is the Earley AI Podcast, hosted by Seth Earley. Join us as we delve deep into the passions, expertise, and experiences of thought leaders and practitioners to talk about what's possible with artificial intelligence. The Earley AI Podcast is sponsored by Earley Information Science, your digital transformation journey with design and deployment of innovative technology solutions, as well as Vector. Now enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Earley AI Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Earley, and today we are going to be talking about some of the intersection of architecture, operations, AI enablement, coding, AI assisting with coding and building applications. And, in this show, we try to get beyond buzzwords. We try to get into what's really practical, what can be applied, how it works to provide business value, what organizations need to do. And so today, I'm really excited to have Charlie Betz, who's a principal analyst at Forrester Research, and he focuses on digital operating models, enterprise architecture, and the future of work. Charlie brings a systemic or systems thinking approach to the way digital initiatives are planned, are governed, and scaled, and his insights are very relevant to leaders trying to make AI real in complex environments. Welcome to the show, Charlie. Nice to have you.
Great to be here, Seth.
I was just asking you about your weekend, and you had said you were wrestling with Claude. Tell me what your wrestling was. What were you trying to do, and what was frustrating? Again, we talked last time in our prep call about how this is such a great force multiplier, but sometimes when you get all these additional options, you have to sort through them. You have to figure out what's right. You have to fine tune. It takes a lot of work, and then you run into other issues and challenges as you're trying to make these things operational. So what was your particular challenge this weekend?
Sure. Well, just so that the viewers have full context, Claude is the branded name of the major SaaS service, or a major SaaS service from Anthropic. They just as OpenAI names theirs ChatGPT, Anthropic names theirs Claude. And Claude has a variant called Claude Code, which you run at the command line. And Claude essentially serves as a junior developer, I guess, is probably the best term for it. And you can instruct Claude to not just autocomplete code that you're writing, you can tell Claude to write whole modules. You can have it stand up minimum viable products and scaffolding. It's happy to, stand up a database and a middle tier and a front end. I've had it write React. I've had it write, Python-based front ends. I've had it write Jupyter notebooks. It certainly is very adept at managing graphs. It will, via MCP, Model Context Protocol, it will talk directly to Neo4j, and I have used that a lot. And it will, do a variety of very useful things, not just, what we started to, hear about, developers, can start to write code, and then, Copilot will suggest what the final, line of that code might be. We're way beyond that. And so I started to work with Claude in building an entire system, and it's definitely a big force multiplier. I've gotten much further than I ever could have on my own. Claude has written something like 60,000 lines of production code. There's more like 600,000 lines currently in the working directory. But as we containerize and, include stuff intentionally into the containers that actually run, it's at about 60,000 lines. And it's helped me ingest 15,000 nodes and 45,000 edges into a graph that is starting to get pretty far beyond just proof of concept. It's becoming useful to me in my work as an analyst. And this has all been quite an enlightening journey. But it has its frustrations. So I was saying to you, I spent the weekend wrestling Claude, or maybe Claude wrangling, whispering. There it is, the Claude whisperer, like that old movie, The Horse Whisperer, right? Because I think, boys, if they say don't anthropomorphize the large language model, no, no, bad, terrible, terrible. It's just algorithms. Jeez, these things act like junior programmers.
Unbelievable.
It is just, I mean, all the behaviors of a contract maintenance programmer or a junior programmer. They patch, they post process, they forget which environment they're in. Oh my God.
Wow.
They will blow away the database if you aren't careful. I mean,
Wow.
there's stories circulating on the internet. I've been quite cautious. I back up my database. I have tested backup and restore scripts. Everything gets committed to GitHub. And
Yeah.
there are still, I mean, when you take proper precautions, it's still, 3 steps forward, 1 step back on many
Mhm.
days.
Yeah.
This weekend
Yeah.
was more like a lot of 1 step back.
Yeah. So take it up a level, which is
Sure,
when you were first talking, I know that it's possible for people in our industry to speak sentences and paragraphs entirely in acronyms.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. No, that's okay. No, that's okay. It's funny, like you were saying what Claude was, but then you went into a lot of things, that people may not be as familiar with in terms of from the business side. But why don't you abstract it a layer and just say, what are the different components and things that you're working with? And then what are you trying to accomplish? And I know you can't get into too
Sure,
much because there's proprietary stuff,
you're
but
right.
you're also not a professional developer or coder.
Mm-mm.
Now,
No,
you have an undergraduate degree in liberal arts, as I recall.
I
Is that
do.
right? And now you're doing this kind of work. Now, is that because of years and years of diving in and self-educating, or how much of this?
Well, it's a little, I mean, I have a political science degree as an undergrad, but then I have a master's in software engineering.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
And I was at the,
That's a different story.
yeah, no, and I was an employee at the University of Minnesota and I could take courses for free. So
Yeah.
I took a number of the Introduction to Computer Science courses. I've had Intro to C, I've had algorithms and data structures in
Oh,
C++.
okay. You're not a mere mortal.
No, so I apologize. I'm a little bit of a ringer,
Yeah.
but I did take the approach, it's not exactly vibe coding, but I did take an approach of saying, I don't want to really particularly look at the code. I just want to see how far I get if I don't look at the code. Can I read the code? Absolutely. I can read the code, but I don't want to
Mhm.
any more than if I, as a business owner, were to hire a developer and have
Yeah.
them build a system
Yeah.
for me, I don't want to read the code in that case either.
Exactly.
Now, I know there's a lot of purists out there who are like, well, somebody should be reading the code and, don't you care
Yeah.
about the craft? And no, I really don't care about the craft. I care about the results.
Right.
I'm sorry to be so blunt,
No, not at all. And then I
you
think
know?
that's the attitude people have to have. Too many
Yeah,
times we get caught up in the elegance of our code, the elegance of
yeah.
our technology and our solution, and the stuff that's most important. It can be very elegant and not be aligned with the business need. So you're saying I don't really care about the elegance behind this. The
As long as
palettes, yeah. Go
as
ahead.
long as it works, and there are a number of things I put in, but you asked me to take it up a level. So I pride myself on being able to speak at multiple levels. And I know I started off a little technical there. So let me reset.
They set you up there.
Okay. So if I was explaining this to a non-technical audience, I
Executive.
now, as an industry analyst, my job is essentially to provide guidance on where the technology markets are going. And on a non-technical level, I compare it when I had to explain my job to my father. I simply said, I do consumer reports for the chief information officer, right?
Yep.
That's what we do in a nutshell. We're not consultants. People say, oh, they'll lump us in together. They say, oh, Forrester and Deloitte. One of these things is not like the other. 5-year-old Sesame Street, right? Just remember that song. As an industry analyst, I have certain needs. I need to track markets. I need to understand all the companies in a given market, and I cover a specific market, and I won't go down the rabbit hole of the market I cover for right now, at least. But I cover a market that probably is $250 billion a year of the total $5 trillion in global IT spend.
And just a quick thumbnail of just define what that market is versus the overall spend.
Sure. The global economy is about $50 trillion a year. That's all the economic activity in the world. So hopefully all the MBAs and finance CFOs are with me. 10% of that, by a number of decent sources, including Forrester, $5 trillion a year is spent on Amazon, Oracle, Microsoft, SAP, Deloitte's IT offerings, McKinsey's IT-related offerings, and it just rolls on up to roughly NVIDIA and Intel and AMD and chip manufacturers. Now, this is not technology in the broad sense, because that would include biotech and electrical tech and mechanical tech. This is infotech. It starts with the silicon, goes up from there in terms of all the management and solutions and how do you solve a problem with computers. $5 trillion a year. With me so far? Non-technical, I mean, financially technical, but yeah. And then 250 billion of that, so roughly 5%, is the market I cover. And without going into a lot of detail, that segment of the market is characterized by vendors like ServiceNow and Atlassian and Dynatrace and Datadog. And now we're getting into domains that probably are unfamiliar to a lot of people, although many people have heard of ServiceNow by now.
Right. And how were you is that ITSM?
Plus.
Okay. ITSM is IT service management, and then what is the plus plus? So I just want to get a quick thumbnail.
Sure.
But what is it?
AI ops.
Okay.
Portfolio management.
Yep. ML.
Basically, what we would call the business of IT, or the IT control plane.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because that 5% is extremely leveraged.
Right.
Percent is how the board and the CIO, the CEO and the CIO know what's going on with all the massive amounts of IT spend going out the door to vendors like Salesforce.
Sure. Okay.
Right.
Gotcha. So that's kind of understanding your world and managing it and operational.
Right. And that is my business.
And keeping
my
the
business
lights on.
Is to be a trusted advisor and a global authority on that problem.
And optimizing. And so the whole idea of using these types of accelerators is right in your wheelhouse, because this is directly impacting the ability for organizations to operate more efficiently in that space. So this is a critical piece. So tell me what does that mean for that industry, for that $250 billion a year segment? What does it mean?
Let me just also clarify. I started with my personal experience. So there's almost like there's two sides of the coin here. In order for me to analyze the impact of AI on the 250 billion and then also the broader 5 trillion, and we've got many analysts who are looking at the impact on the broader 5 trillion, but I own the impact on the 250 billion with a number of other analysts, but it's a much broader problem. That's a big problem. And so I'm using AI to help write tools so that I can actually analyze this problem. And I can talk about both of these. Now, to answer your question, if we talk specifically about the impact of AI on the IT management infrastructure, I have an architecture or a model that focuses on 7 domains, and we see AI influencing the development of software, certainly. We see AI influencing the end user experience. We see AI influencing our financial understandings of information technology. The information technology at a large, structurally significant bank, for example, is $8 to $10 billion a year. That kind of money would, if you spun it out as its own business, would be in the Fortune 500 itself.
Right.
There is a core of information that always comes up, and I call it the core, and it includes concepts like business application or service and higher order concepts like capabilities and value streams, but
Mhm.
this is essentially at the heart of it, the
Yep.
architecture heart. AI ops is a massive domain, a lot of money. Vendors like
Mhm.
Dynatrace and Datadog, I mean, right there, $2 billion each a year, I
Mhm.
think, roughly. Then we have the classic information management space, which includes vendors like Informatica that just got bought by Salesforce and
Mhm.
data.world that just got bought by ServiceNow.
Mhm.
But this is your data cataloging and data governance, data quality. And then finally, we have risk and security, which is absolutely a control plane function. AI is impacting all seven in
Right.
specific ways. I'll
Right.
pause.
Right. So, what's kind of a summary takeaway for executives when you look at the impact of all those seven different domains within that $250 billion segment? What is kind of the takeaway? We started off talking about the fact that this coding can be accelerated and that you're building applications that are very powerful, very sophisticated. There's still nuances there. But what's the overarching lesson here? Because I still see large organizations struggling with how to align and coordinate and optimize how they're using AI in a way that is producing the most value. So this is kind of under the covers a little bit, but what's the takeaway? What's your message for executives to say, here's what you need to think about to embed AI in all of your operations, because that's what's happening. And if they're not doing it, their vendors are certainly doing it. But what do they need to care about versus what they're purchasing off the shelf versus building? I know it's a broad question, but can you provide some high level guidance?
Yeah, absolutely. There's only one point. I would say look for the feedback loop.
Mhm. Okay. Yep.
Um,
What's the impact? How is it being measured?
and because what AI is enabling is essentially a faster feedback loop than we've ever had before in industry. And this is where the old becomes new.
Yeah.
My view on generative AI is it is enabling these kinds of continuous learning loops at the enterprise level.
Yep.
And that is the fundamental economic promise of AI to the enterprise. It's not about chatbots
Yeah.
displacing service
Yeah.
desk operators.
And
It's way more profound than that.
it's not about just asking the chatbot the question and having it give you a response based on its worldview, which is a
No,
model that has disconnected from your systems and processes. It's about
exactly.
using it to operate on your enterprise ecosystems. And I like to say we speed up the information metabolism of the entire organization. That means
Yes.
people's inputs, you get to them faster, more contextualized, getting them what they need when they need it, and then their outputs are produced more quickly for someone else's input. And that cycles
Mhm.
through every part of the organization because you're speeding that value creation. You're speeding the flows of knowledge
Yeah.
and data throughout that ecosystem and those value chains. And that's where we're really, and then getting that feedback, getting that continuous improvement. The fact that it used to take weeks to cycle through, getting feedback or getting iterations from an agency on marketing campaigns is down to, you know, minutes, hours, day. You know what I mean? It's a much faster cycle time because you're
Mhm.
constantly getting this feedback. You're constantly getting the answers much more quickly, and we're able to process all of that stuff. The downside, in my opinion, is that you have so many more opportunities and so many more choices and so many more options that you need to spend time trying to figure those out. But it is, as you say, it's speeding all of those information flows. And that is really what's critical and what's so interesting. Now, when we prepared, we talked about putting demands on operating models and enterprise infrastructure. How are digital operations evolving to accommodate this? So again, it's embedded in all of these different things, but what's happening within digital operations and IT service operations and ops and machine learning ops? What's happening to accommodate all of these changes?
It's variegated. It's highly various. May I share a slide?
Sure, yeah, please.
Our intentions as human beings, as executives and enterprises, will be increasingly informed by the generative AI infrastructure in the middle. And I emphasize large
Yep.
language models, agents, graph databases, RAG, and vector databases, is accelerated by the infrastructure, certainly force multipliers like large language model-based coding. Realization of value continues on as, while we're delivering transactional value, some of that transactional value may itself incorporate large language models, but I think the important point here for this feedback loop is that signal emerges from the value realization, from the actual IT operations at the coalface, and the signal is increasingly processed by agents and curated into the knowledge management infrastructure in the middle, which then feeds the intentions and the cycle starts again. And this has always been the ideal of the learning organization. The trouble is that years ago, just to give you a couple
Before
of
you
excerpts.
just want to explain the slide for people who might just be listening to the podcast, you have a cycle of intend, deliver, realize, signal, and that's kind of a loop, right?
Yes, thank you.
And that loop represents what organizations want to do or want to accomplish or what their goal is, the delivery of that, so the ability to operate on that. And then when you say the realization, what does that mean?
Well, delivery, if I may, intention is strategy. Delivery, it just very simple. Let's just keep it super simple. That's project management. That's actually writing the code. It's writing the system. Delivery is a bit of an ambiguous word.
And code, yeah.
Yeah. Realization is operations.
What's the result? How is it impacting?
Yeah, I mean, you have production code running at scale on a,
it's doing something.
it's doing something. It's responding to people's inquiries. It's managing a supply chain. It's helping you hire employees, train them, all of that.
And then it's giving the signals to say what's working, what's not working, how is this actually operating, what are the metrics, and so on. And then that goes back to feedback to intend to change the strategy. It's really strategy, execution, operationalization, I can say that word, feedback, and then cycling back into strategy.
And then the cycle starts again.
And in the middle of it are all the things that enable this. So you talk about RAG, right? Your governed ontology. I love that you have a box for ontology. I love that you have a RAG. I love that you have the graph database. And what is the attention QK?
That's the large language model. I've been working with just how do you graphically represent as an architect a large language model, and I've settled on a cube with the core, a very brief representation of the core algorithm for large language model transformers, I believe.
I have some ideas for some graphics to represent n dimensions, multi-dimensions. I have not realized them yet, but when you can't, it's hard to think beyond 4 dimensions, but you can start to add more attributes and dimensions. So, and what's so interesting about graph databases is that they do, in vector spaces, is that they take all of the different characterizations of a piece of information and they provide attributes, and it can be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of attributes. And then you're saying, we're going to look for something that has similar attributes in n dimensions in this vector space. And it's very difficult to kind of wrap your head around, right? But that's kind of how that works. But anyway, let's keep going. So you were going to show another slide. I just want to explain that one. Thank you.
When we started to think about continuous improvement, it was applied on the shop floor, in the 50s or even before. I mean, the history of it is sometimes a little obscure, but basically things like plan, do, study, act, plan, do, check, act. I mean, they've been around for a long time. But the core of my argument, one of the core premises, is that when we tried to scale them up to the enterprise, they did not scale.
Right.
And they did not scale because of the information problem.
Right.
And they became bureaucratized. I mean, you started to have, departments of continuous improvement, and really, they did not fulfill their mission. I saw many failed attempts, and I am not aware of too many successful attempts at the enterprise level. Toyota's culture, perhaps, being the most notable exception to that. Toyota did operationalize continuous learning, but it's far from a simple, feedback loop on the shop floor with Toyota. It's an entire company built on it. So those are the things that then led me back to the feedback loop that I showed you. And by the way, the graphic here that we're showing is just of a large plan, do, check, act gear bogged down and cracking, surrounded by piles and piles of documentation. Back to the question you have about, well, what's the impact across the IT operational landscape? Well, this was the diagram that I was recounting for you. And we talked earlier about development and user experience and IT finance and the core, and then AI ops and information management and security and risk. Now, and I said, you asked me, well, what's changing? What's different? My response is it's complex. It's very complex. You can point to in any one of these domains here, and what we have here for the non-visual folks is there's about 50, I think, circles of different colors that all represent an information topic or an entity. The entities can, include things like server, asset, alert, service, pipeline, story, defect, epic, risk, exploit, cluster, budget, cost. It's essentially the entire, I think a reasonable ontology of the critical things in IT management. And I've been working on this space for a long time now. I've been very interested in it, as co-founder of the IT for IT standard and so forth. This is still kind of a notional architecture as much as it is a rigorous ontology. But it shows, the domain that I'm focusing on. And to answer your question, there are hundreds, thousands of experiments. There are dozens of little startups. There are significant strategic efforts and experiments happening within the big vendors like ServiceNow and Dynatrace. You take even something like Dynatrace, and they're building a complete graph infrastructure, and they're focused on the light blue AI ops, tracing from, signal up into problems. And what they're doing may or may not be relevant to finance or security, but they have their own vendors like Apptio, increasingly applying AI to the problem of IT spend, and certainly the cloud cost management vendors and the FinOps vendors doing much the same thing. Different algorithms, different data topics, different data sources. And so, it's $250 billion worth of market.
Right.
And that's going to attract a lot of experimentation.
Right.
But what I've been telling people, I've been making a number of calls to action. And, the one of the first calls to action is appointing an architect to manage this. If you are operating at scale, just like you might have an architect focused on supply chain, if you're a manufacturer, you might take one of your enterprise architects and tell them your focus is supply chain. You're the domain architect for supply chain. If you're a bank, you probably have architects focused on payments, and that's all they're going to do for a good chunk of time. And payments architects, when I was in banking, that's all they'd done for quite a while, and they knew everything about big banking payments. You need an IT for IT architect or an IT control plane architect, whatever you want to call them. You need somebody to plug in and reason about this stuff because it is so highly leveraged. The second call to action is govern your data, appoint a data steward, and they might be hand in glove with that architect, but they should come out of your data and information management capability and govern the meaning, and do not simply concede to the vendors full control over your graph. You own the meaning of what it is you're doing. Now, it's influenced by industry. Certainly industry, you want to maintain some consistency with industry labels. But at the end of the day, ServiceNow and Atlassian actually might not agree on what certain things should be called. And then you've got a bit of a headache.
Right.
And the third call to action is directly to the enterprise architects of the world. Always include an improvement loop in your Gen AI architectures. Always look for how the loop is closing, because that is the value of generative AI. It helps us close feedback loops more quickly and optimize them over time. And because Gen AI is stochastic, imprecise, whatever you want to call it, you need that continuous improvement loop because it is not deterministic. And how do we build systems in a
Right.
non-deterministic world out of imperfect components? How do we build high-functioning systems? We include telemetry, we include control, we include
Yep.
cybernetic loops. And this
Yep.
is not a new idea.
Right. Right. Absolutely. No, those are great calls to action. And I think they make a lot of sense for organizations when they're trying to evolve this. There is a lot of legacy thinking and a lot of legacy architecture. And how do organizations overcome that? Because I know that for one large retail vendor that we worked with, they had 700 systems that were used to manage that customer and vendor experience. 700 systems, and
Right.
you don't rip out 700 systems, right?
Mm-mm.
So
No.
and yet a lot of that stuff is taking up so many resources to keep the lights on and to do patches and just keep it going, but there's no room for that real transformation. So where do you see organizations with those legacy systems, and in many cases the legacy mindset going? Is it just going to be a matter of existential reality, and they'll either make it or they won't? They'll either be Kodak or Blockbuster, or they're going to find make the harsh choices and bite the bullet.
It's like, Seth, I'm sorry. It's like you were watching me this weekend.
I was.
So the
It's
problem,
fine. When you downloaded that last podcast,
right? Yeah, yeah. No, and this actually ties back to what I kicked off with.
Mm.
What was one of the things I was wrangling Claude to do this weekend
Mm.
was to build a systems dynamics model for
Mhm.
technical debt.
Wow.
And this is something I'm very excited about, and this is the first time I've mentioned it in public, other than some casual mentions on LinkedIn, perhaps. So
Wow.
the thing is that IT management is poorly understood. Just stating historically, kind of from a clinical quasi-academic perspective, I'm not an academic, but I understand the research process. I understand the peer review process enough to be dangerous. And I have a fairly decent grasp of the literature on IT management and technical debt and related topics. Most of the industry and even academic concepts out there that purport to provide guidance on IT are static and do not actually look at the feedback loops that are operating.
Interesting.
Problem that you characterized, I can't tell from a distance if that's a good thing or a bad thing. We know a few things about technical debt, and we know enough about technical debt to actually derive a functioning systems dynamics model in the J. Forrester sense. We know that statements have been made by Marty Kagan and reinforced by others that companies with a good handle on technical debt work on it every day
Yeah.
with with at least 10 to 30% of their overall engineering capacity.
Wow. Wow.
That's actually quantifiable. That's a very nice quantifiable assertion. And if we, for example, assume for the sake of a model that 20% of engineering app capacity being allocated to technical debt results in a model that operates at equilibrium, that's a powerful constraint, a very powerful constraint. You wind up with a model that could go anywhere, be anything, do anything, to a model that actually has an axis that it must revolve around.
Right.
We also know that when systems can.
Now, when you say working on technical debt, are you saying they're constrained by technical debt and their energy goes into working around and managing, or are you saying that they are working on reducing that technical debt?
Both. So in the positive sense, in the positive case, and so I mean, you're starting to probe deeply into this complex systems dynamics model, and we have to think very carefully about precisely what we mean in order to quantify it credibly.
Mm.
There is operational demand, which I view as a form of bad demand. This is the demand for immediate firefighting and fixes and the immediate because the systems are degrading and their value must be restored.
Right. Okay.
And
the house on fire stuff.
house on fire. And the house on fire is not the same as the house on fire demand is elastic demand.
Yeah.
There is also inelastic demand, like the power, your monthly, let's go on-prem, or if you have fixed workloads in Amazon, power licenses,
Right.
your baseline inelastic floor of what you are absolutely going to spend no matter what every month, right? So you have inelastic operational demand, you have elastic operational demand. The elastic operational demand can start to expand, at which point it starts to impact the delivery capacity for new functionality to respond to market changes.
Right.
Now, there are 3 classes of technical debt that we have identified, and we are stepping intentionally away from not away, we're expanding very intentionally on Ward Cunningham's initial definition, which was focused on what I would call refactoring debt. Refactoring is code that is what may have been fit for purpose but was written hastily or is simply degrading over time, not because code degrades, but because circumstances change.
Sure. Yep.
There are 2 other classes of technical debt that clients come with their hair on fire to us saying, we've got horrible technical debt. And you look at the literature and it's like, well, what you are describing isn't recognized in the literature. And I'm tired of telling clients they're wrong. It's not a good look. And so the other 2 classes of technical debt are rationalization debt and refreshing debt. Refreshing debt is simply, is the software up to date or are you stretching it out past end of life?
Yeah.
And this is it's a decay curve. Software goes through it becomes deprecated, it goes end of life, but you can pay for extended support. And then even the extended support dries up and you got to go to some third party, Joe's Garage and, software maintenance, to maintain it because you just can't get rid of it.
Personalized in 1960.
And when you hit the tail end of refresh, then you're into the rationalized problem, which is where we see digital transformations failing and really damaging companies and contributing to a lot of problems in the industry. This is the problem of you do a digital transformation. I talked to a client 2 weeks ago, said, don't talk to me about digital transformations to reduce technical debt. We've done 3 and all they've done is add to technical debt. Because the first one took us off the mainframe into Power Builder, and we still have Power Builder. And then the second one took us off Power Builder into Java and WebSphere, and we still have Java and WebSphere. And now the third one was all about web native stuff, and so now we've got the whole web native stack and microservices as well, and we still have the mainframe. So we have 4 layers of archaeology. We've had 3 major digital transformations, and our technical debt is, continues. We're at technical bankruptcy now.
Unbelievable.
And all of these things, these stories I'm telling you, can be captured and modeled quantitatively. And ultimately what we see is that there are 4 or 5 major vicious cycle technical debt loops, and there's a couple of positive virtuous cycle loops. And this is ultimately, I think, how we're going to solve these kinds of problems. How we're going to get line of sight there, I hope to be a player in this conversation. But this is exactly what Claude was so beneficial to me, because I've been looking at systems dynamics for years. I have Sturman's book. I bought Stella, or I think one of the 2 years ago. I just didn't have the time. I mean, life is short. I get, day to day. 2 weeks ago, I got up and I said, hey, Claude, could you create a systems dynamics model for me? Go off and do that. And it's like, oh, sure. And it did. And all of a sudden I have power tools at my disposal that I never had before.
Yeah. Wow. So when you go back to that company that went through those 3 digital transformations and each time dug the hole deeper,
right?
What should they have done differently? And now they have a mess, and now they have a bigger mess, and they have more layers of complexity. And as you say, you have to go spelunking very deeply into the code in order to fix things at the root cause, and then that still impacts their agility. They didn't get any, maybe they got some new capabilities, but they overall, I mean, if maybe that mainframe layer is very, very stable, and those other layers are somewhat stable, where does the evolution and the agility change? But what should they have done differently? What should they have done differently? Where did they mess up?
Well, I mean, counterfact. I mean, none of us knew how to run computers for the first 100 years of computers. I think that's kind of the basic. I mean, we have to take a historical perspective. We're still in our infancy as an industry. If I could wave a wand and if they could travel back in time, that clearly what they need to do is they need to continually pay down and prioritize the refactoring, the refreshing, and the rationalization, which on their face do not have good ROI. And that's the fundamental problem, is that if you take a green eye shade bean counterpoint of view, you're like, oh, we can sweat this technology a little longer. We can defer that. Let's focus on real value over and over again. And the bottom line is that we see the destructive consequences of those kind of very limited points of view. And they are, at this point, existential crises. And at this point, if you're at 60 to 65% technical debt, you are in technical bankruptcy. And I don't have good news for you. There's no real easy way out short. I can say what you would need to do. First of all, you need visibility. You need to understand the dynamics at play. That would help. But companies and products do get to a point where it's just a matter of time before they're displaced, And companies wind up in financial bankruptcy all the time.
Well, I know there's one company that we had as a client that was a financial services company that was 100 years old. And they had literally 1,000 different systems that were used because they bought businesses and bought businesses and just never, ever,
they never merged them. No,
we merged the systems. And so, where do you go with that? I mean, they still had, they were trying to manage documentation on these things, and, who knows about this stuff? Nobody knows.
Now, AI will help to a degree. It can intervene in legacy code bases. It can document them with far greater precision and patience. And that's one of the advantages to AI, is it's patient. It's relentlessly patient. It will just keep doing work. Even if you've got the money, you can't find people to do the work.
Right.
They just start phoning it in. They start getting casual. Their attention span drops. The agents will just keep hammering away at it until you've got the systems documented. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel there.
I agree. It is still an investment, and it's still hard to get ROI. And when people are trading that off with, well, I can make this investment in the sales, or marketing application, or I'm going to get X return on that, or I can go back and fix stuff that's not very sexy and that's not going to show ROI. You know what's going to happen every time, and that is a lack of vision
every time. Except it doesn't happen every time, and I'll give a shout out to Marty Kagan, who doesn't know me, but I follow his writing, and he's a great thinker, head of the Silicon Valley product group, and it's actually his quote that inspired my dynamics model in some ways. He says, over the years, it's become clear that the leading product companies that have a handle on technical debt, and there are some, spend 10 to 30%.
Okay. Yeah. So you just have to say this has to be at an executive board level decision.
It has to be a board level decision that we are here for the long haul, and we will continually reinvest in our technical platform, in our technical capabilities, by paying down the debt. And we understand that it's the ongoing temptation.
Because in 10 years, you're really not going to be able to do it.
You won't. I mean, if you just want to run for 5 years and then have a success and have an exit, and this part of it is that, the incentives for people, hey, I come in for 2 years and I, leave with my bonus, or, I make my money and then I take off.
Go to a new.
But this is what the board should be, actually actively managing as a risk.
That's right. They have the longevity. We're almost out of time, but I just wanted to touch on something very briefly, and maybe we can have another podcast about this. But
sure,
you talked about swarms of agents working on problems, and I just think we should just get into a whole agent discussion on another session. But what do you have to say about agents? Because one of the things you said that was interesting is that there's so many misconceptions about agents, and there's so much advice and bad,
Yeah.
it's just a lot of stuff that's noise and nonsense.
So the disclaimer is that I still am learning myself, as we all are. And we have other Forrester analysts, very talented ones like Leslie Joseph and others who are really, really leaning into agentic.
Yep. Yep.
But somebody asks me about agents, and I'm the only person in the room, and Leslie's not there, or whoever. There are two things that I do know. One is that full agentic autonomy, to me, in the standard enterprise context, is at this juncture absolute non-starter. I mean, I've already seen Claude try to wipe out my database, and we know that it has wiped out databases in other situations. And when you talk about autonomous, what are we saying?
That would be bad.
What are we saying? That the agent would go out to your API catalog and it could introspect into any of those APIs and determine what APIs it wanted to access, and you would give it permissions to do whatever those APIs enabled, and it could just do this on its own without, any kind of, I mean, okay,
No.
obviously that sounds ludicrous. That's not going to happen anytime soon.
Right.
We would need whole infrastructures of control and intent management that are simply not there yet operationally.
Absolutely.
Right? And the business model and the business impacts, the operating model impacts, which are all concepts that so many of the AI experts out there just find immensely tedious.
Yeah.
Enterprise operating models. Oh, Charlie, gag me now. That's so boring. Agents are cool. They're exciting. It's like, yeah, right.
Talk about that. Wait a minute. Let me check my calendar. How about never? Never available.
Right?
Yeah.
So I balance that, and I'm also aware, I hear rumblings. I don't dig in because time is limited, but I hear rumblings of people who are trying to run these things in well-sandboxed computer science research type labs or enthusiast experimenting, and they're like, the agents are completely uncontrollable. We don't know what they're doing,
Lie. They lie.
Right, exactly. But I want to balance this now with another case that I have experimented with and can work. And that's where the swarm, first of all, does not have access to production. The swarm is ring-fenced off in containers or,
it has a job to do within that context.
And within that context, you give it a big job like a system specification. And this is what Reuven Cohen has been advocating, a guy named Reuven Cohen.
Yeah, I know that name. Yeah.
Look him up on LinkedIn. And Adrian Cockcroft, who is former CTO of Netflix, has been very enthusiastic about Reuven's work, which is why a lot of people in the world are paying attention to Reuven.
Nice.
And for example, it gets back to waterfall development. If you can write a 300-page spec, you can give it to one of these agentic swarms, and you can stand up not just one instance of Claude, but you can stand up 8 instances of Claude in a swarm-like choreography with a queen bee agent and a testing agent and an architect agent and a coding agent and da-da-da-da-da. And they all will do things, and they will, in some cases, create real value. And people are getting varying results, but there's a lot of people out there saying, yeah, this stuff really works. But notice that this swarm has a clear goal.
Yes.
And it is not talking to production systems.
It's guardrail. Yes, it's fenced in. It's definitely fenced in. I totally agree with you. And one of the things we use in our agentic approaches, and I think you and I talked about this when I was showing you some pieces of our virtual information architect platform, is that we go out when we're doing things like product data remediation. We'll go out to different sources. We'll pull that in. We'll work through things agentically because it is going through and accessing other data sources and integrating it and making certain decisions. But it has a very clear set of objectives, it has a very clear set of inputs, has a very clear set of outputs, and we're very specific about what it can and cannot do. Right. So within the context of that, it
has autonomy. But the guardrails, see, here's what I get troubled with, Seth. I give Claude guardrails all the time, and Claude loses context and forgets the guardrails. I don't trust the agents to remember and keep their guardrails internalized when they're optimizing for an objective. when that's their function or whatever you would call it, there is a tendency to, tail dropping in the queues or whatever it is, there is a tendency for them to drift away from the governance protocol. And at least that's my personal experience. Now, could this be resolved over time? Yes,
Yeah.
but we would need a lot of confidence, a lot of empirical evidence. I would need to see a lot of empirical evidence for anybody saying my agent can be trusted to honor guardrails at all times.
Right.
I don't think we're there yet as an industry. And most people aren't
Yeah.
even thinking about these operating model impacts.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much work to be done. Charles,
Oh my God.
I got to the first of my 12 questions. No, this is a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it. And I thank you so much for sharing your perspective. It's clear that getting AI right, it entails so much and there's so many capabilities and it's getting better all the time. It's very exciting. It's very scary because, organizations don't know what they don't know and they're trying to move forward with this stuff. But I say, a bias toward action is important, but the feedback loops are critical. And
Yep.
for those listening, we'll link to Charles' work at Forrester and other resources in the show notes. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe to Early AI Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And stay tuned for more insights from leaders of the
Awesome.
AI and the enterprise. Charles, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Take
Bye.
care.
Thank you for joining us on another deep dive into AI innovation. Tune in next time when we introduce another industry expert and discuss how to maximize AI in your world. The Early AI Podcast is sponsored by Early Information Science and Vector. To learn more, visit early.com. That's EARLEY.com. Thank you for tuning in.